Israeli President Isaac Herzog addressed Congress today as part of his visit to the U.S. He reassured American lawmakers that despite efforts to overhaul his country's judicial system, democracy remains strong in Israel.
When the State of Israel was established in 1948, the land which the Almighty promised Abraham, to which Moses led the Israelites, the land of the Bible, of milk and honey, evolved into an exquisite land of democracy.
CBS News congressional correspondent Nikole Killion joins us now from Capitol Hill. Hey there, Nikole. So, first of all, remind our viewers where Herzog stands on Netanyahu's judicial reform proposal, and what were the key takeaways from his speech?
Well, really, this was about reaffirming the U.S.-Israeli relationship and to mark the 75th anniversary of Israeli statehood. And so that was, in large part, the theme of the president's address to Congress. It was inside the chamber. It was standing room only. And the president did reaffirm that relationship, praised the relationship between Israel and the United States as ironclad, and encouraged that relationship to strengthen and continue. He also talked about some of the threats facing Israel with respect to Iran, and he did address the elephant in the room in terms of some of the criticism that has been echoed by some members of Congress with respect to Israel. Of course, there was a big controversy leading up to this speech where Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, for instance, referred to Israel as a racist state. And so, this is something that the president tried to, while not directly addressing those comments, but talked about criticism of his country, saying that he certainly understands, but he also doesn't want it to devolve into anti-Semitism, which received a pretty rousing applause from members of Congress who, of course, in the House just yesterday passed a resolution reaffirming support for Israel and denouncing the language that Jayapal used.
Yeah, and Nikole, we should clarify for our viewers that in Israel, the president is more of a ceremonial post. The prime minister, the post that Benjamin Netanyahu holds, that's much more political. And not all lawmakers were in attendance to hear the Israeli president speak. Why did some Democrats boycott this?
Yeah, well, there were a handful of Democrats that did not attend this speech, most notably some of the more progressive members of the squad, including Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, also Congresswoman Cori Bush, AOC, among others. And really what they argue is that, they did not attend this address in protest of the president's presence, and because they do believe that Israel, in their view, is an apartheid state, particularly on this issue of settlements. As we know, Israel has expanded settlements, which has kind of been a controversial issue. And so because of that, they believe that Israel is not treating Palestinians in a fair way. And because of that, they believe some of the policies of the country are racist. And so while certainly many would take issue with that, that is in part why these lawmakers are protesting, particularly around the issue of human rights with respect to the Palestinians. And so, again, that is why they are boycotting this speech. But as I mentioned, it didn't dissuade the by and large majority of members, since it was standing room in the chamber.
All right, Nikole, thank you.
Thanks, Nikole.